Mississippi.
Ladies and gentlemen, the singing senators.
The best singer in the bunch, although Ashcroft argues about that, Larry Craig from Idaho. And I'm Trent Lott. I'm from Mississippi.
Ooh, dig a little deeper in the well, boys. Dig a little deeper in the well. If you want to get a cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. Dig a little deeper in the well, boys. Dig a little deeper in the well. If you want to get a cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. Daddy used to tell me, don't be fooled by what you see. If you want to get to the heart of things, you gotta look way down deep.
Second place won't get it, son. A winner's gotta come in first. There's nothing worse than to take a drink that leaves you with a thirst.
Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Trent Lott. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Paul Gallo, long time no see or hear. It's a great pleasure to be back with you to talk to the people of Mississippi.
You know what I'm thinking about when I hear that we would be a better nation if we got back to that type of atmosphere and environment in both the House and the Senate. But it's long gone from that one, has it not?
It is, but it can come back. You know, when I was in the Senate representing Mississippi and majority leader, I did a lot of things to try to make things happen. Number one is communication. People just don't talk to each other in Washington now. That's the number one problem. Number two, senators, congressmen, they don't bring their families to Washington. They fly in on Monday or Monday night and want to go out on Thursday. But they don't have a relationship. And that's why I had the singing senators. My attitude was, if you can sing together, you can vote together for the good of the country. But the main thing that's missing is it's just one word. It's called leadership. And right now we're suffering in the White House, in the Senate, and we have been in the House, although I think the House of Representatives under new Speaker Mike Johnson is making some progress. And so it can turn around. You know, I like that new song. It ain't perfect, but it's going to be okay.
There's so many things I want to ask you. I want to go, first of all, and I mentioned a few moments ago, I've never seen in modern history the Democrat Party being this much out of kilter with this many stumbling blocks, and wonder how in the world are they going to achieve their goal on November 5th. Do you remember the Democrat Party being this askewed and this messed up?
No, not really. The Democratic Party has just shifted more and more to the left, particularly under President Biden, which really kind of, surprised me. I served in the Senate with him. You could work with him. But they have really shifted way to the left. And their positions domestically is just about spending more money, giving people, forgiving the student loans. What about the people that got loans and worked to pay them back or couldn't go to college because they couldn't afford a loan? I mean, it's a real problem. So we need to get back to basic economics and, trying to help people keep more of their hard-earned earnings and, produce more oil and gas so the price of gasoline to go down. I have not seen it in this bad a condition. But we're fixing to see some changes, and I hope they're good.
Yeah. I mean, you served for 35 years. We're talking 16 years in the House, 19 years in the Senate. You had command of the gavel, where Schumer has it and won't let it go. But you were the majority leader for a while. And it's a lot of history, not only in the state of Mississippi, but nationwide, where your name is. I mean, you were in some of those Oval Office meetings with Ronald Reagan.
Well, we used to meet with Reagan every Tuesday morning that the House was in session at 9 o'clock in the cabinet room in the White House. And usually it was bipartisan. And the president would sit there and, he'd ask questions and he'd listen to us go back and forth. And it made a difference. And in those days, for 8 years in the House, I was the whip, the vote counter for the Republicans. And even though we were in the minority, we won almost every vote because we had 40 or 50 Democrats who were with us. But if I had a problem, I'd call President Reagan and say, I'm having problems with this congressman or that congressman. He'd get on the phone. That sort of thing just doesn't happen now. So hopefully When President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance get in office, they'll have the wisdom to work with and listen to members of Congress. You know, my attitude is the greatest leadership tool is your ears. You got to listen to the people. You got to listen to your colleagues. And then you develop a strategy based on what's best for the country.
I had a couple of questions to follow up on that one. Number one, when you heard some people say that it was mandatory during a cabinet meeting, the one that you just alluded to, under Joe Biden to submit questions and have everything written out, and then they had the audacity to stand at the podium during a press conference or the press briefing each day, and so that was just the normal. That's how things are done forever in press briefings. Did you have to submit questions to Ronald Reagan before you actually went into the meetings?
Absolutely not. He would throw out questions sometime. I remember one of my favorite stories with him. We were having a bipartisan meeting, Republicans and Democrats, in the Oval Office there with the president. Actually, we were in the cabinet room, and we were discussing monetary policy. And I'm sitting in next to the president. He's listening, and I look over, and he's doodling on a notepad, drawing cartoon characters, you know, cowboy on a horse and all. And I'm thinking, gosh, he's not even listening. After about 15 minutes of listening and saying nothing, he turned the page over and drew two lines and said, this is the problem. Monetary policy needs to stay within these lines, not go too high or too low. He brought it all to a simple conclusion. He had been listening. When it was over, I said, Mr. President, I'd sure like to get you to autograph that page and let me frame it. I did. And now I've got it framed where on one side are his doodles that he autographed, and on the back side was the graph that he drew. That's what we need. Biden doesn't do that. He hasn't, he didn't meet with the Fed chairman, the Federal Reserve chairman, hadn't met with him in 2 years. He rarely meets with the leadership, even Democrat. And that has got to change.
Did you think that the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan changed him?
I think it did. I've been watching his facial expressions at the convention. I'm not at the convention. I went to.
No, I'm talking about Reagan now. I'm talking about Reagan first of all, and then I'll ask you about Trump.
I think, look, anytime I think it was Churchill that once said that there's nothing more exhilarating than being shot at and missed. Well, neither one of these presidents, Reagan or Trump, were missed, but they survived it. And when you go through that kind of experience and the good Lord spares you, it does change you. I think it changed Reagan. And I've been watching Trump on the convention floor. His facial expressions have changed. In a way, it should humble you out.
Yeah.
It should give you a greater feeling of mission on behalf of our country, the people, and the good Lord.
How do you follow the assassination and all of the not the conspiracy theories itself, but just the inconsistencies of the Secret Service right now? You got to look at it from your experience being there as totally out of the norm so much that there's just no answers.
Well, I did have security off and on for 10 or 12 years, and of course it was just a small detail of 3. But what happened with that assassination tip is just, unexplainable. They've got to have a total investigation. There was absolute lapse in allowing that kid to get up on that roof and get a pot shot at the president and kill another person and wound 2 others. I mean, how did that happen? And, of course, the Secret Service, in my opinion, now has a weak leader. I think they have underestimated the threat. There's got to be a serious congressional investigation of that. For instance, Robert Kennedy did not even have security. It had been burned down. Well, with what happened to his father and his uncle, you would think as a candidate he would have some security. Well, now they have done that, thank goodness.
When you look at all of those inconsistencies and everything else, and then you look at the people that he's put in place, and back when we were playing that song for the first time a long time ago, we never heard of DEI. But now you see some of the people on this staff trying to guard him, 5'7". I don't care if it's a guy or a lady. How do you make it to that echelon at 5'7", 5'8", trying to cover a guy who's 6'2"?
Yeah, it's totally impractical. It's not, a universal criticism of women being in the Secret Service, but you have to pay attention to stature and strength because, quite often it is a physical thing. This president's cabinet is the weakest assembly of people I have ever seen. Right across the board.
It's hard to even imagine. I want to ask you about procedure, because if anybody knows about procedure, it is you, with all the times that you have been in Washington, D.C. What happens next if he resigns next week? If he doesn't, what happens next as far as procedure? We will ask Trent Lott coming up in just a moment.
Idaho, and I'm Trent Lott. I'm from Mississippi.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
Chariots are coming, good news. Good news, chariots are coming, good news. Good news, chariots are coming, and I don't want to be left behind.
Wow.
There's a long white robe in the heaven, I know. There's a long
Ladies
white
and gentlemen,
robe
on with
in the
me
heaven,
is the former senator of the great state of Mississippi, Trent Lott. Trent, I don't think I've ever said this before. That's pretty darn good. You guys were good. I'm serious.
Actually,
that's pretty good.
Well, I sang bass in a quartet at Pascagoula in high school. I sang lead in a quartet at Ole Miss, and so it was natural I have a singing senator's quartet. John Ashcroft from Missouri is really a professional singer, so we put it together. Jim Jeffords from Vermont was our weak link, but he tried. So
Well, you gotta miss that. I mean, that was fun in the midst of all the chaos of Washington D.C. You gotta miss that.
Yeah, and I did some other things to try to bring us together. I established Tartan Day in America. I was the first senator in history to wear a kilt on the floor of the Senate. Senator Barbara Boxer from California came over and said, "What's wrong with this picture? I have on pants and you have on a skirt." I said, "Barbara, this is not a skirt. This is a kilt. Thank you, ma'am." But we did things like that to just enjoy each other's relationship. And by the way, I learned an awful lot about all that. For 4 years before I went to Congress, I worked for the chairman of the Rules Committee, Chairman Bill Calmer of Pascagoula, Mississippi, who served 40 years in Congress before me. I used to sit with him at 5 o'clock, and he'd have a little cigar and maybe a little bourbon, and he'd reminisce and talk about what government really should be like. And I learned a lot from him.
Do you relate to what's going on with Biden at the latter stages of Reagan's term when he began to lose it a little bit?
Yeah, and I've told that story a little bit. I remember it was, I think, late 1987. We had passed an immigration reform bill with some guarantees we were going to seal the border. I went over to Reagan after one of the meetings in the cabinet room and said, "Mr. President, we're not keeping our word on the border. We could do a better job of securing that border." And I remember he looked at me like he didn't know quite what I was talking about or who I was. And I'd been meeting with him usually once or twice a month for 7 years. And that was the first time I realized there was something not quite right. And, we know what happened. And he was a great president. I loved working with him.
Do you fall in with the rest of the people? Well, I shouldn't say the rest of the people. A lot of people who think that for quite a while now, it has not been Joe Biden who's been calling the shots in Washington.
Father Time is one thing you cannot control, and there's no question he's not the Joe Biden that I've served in the Senate with, and he's visibly lost ground even in the last few months, and he needs to come to terms with that. He's had a great career, but I'm afraid that people around him are not being honest with him. Maybe it's just stubbornness on his part, but, Joe Biden and I are about the same age. And I had a New York Times reporter ask me recently, "How come you look younger than Joe?" And I said, "Because I had the good judgment to retire from politics, direct politics, 15 years ago. And when you leave the Senate, you immediately get 10 years younger."
You look at procedure, we were going to talk about that. What happens now? What do you think is going to happen? I wish we had another hour to do this, but when I got to call on you more and get your thoughts, because such a reservoir.
I thought you'd forgotten about me, Paul. You know, I missed talking to you and through you to the people of Mississippi. They were so great to me. But what happens next is pretty confusing, actually. You know, Biden has the delegates. They're talking about having a virtual roll call to lock up his nomination before the convention. There's beginning to be a lot of pressure from people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer saying, Mr. President, you know, you have a little problem here. But mechanically, there is a problem with how they nominate him at the convention. And then what happens if at some point later on he would have to step aside. But my answer to that, having worked for the chairman of the Rules Committee and having been chairman of the Rules Committee in the Senate, you will work it out. You know, you find a way to move forward. You don't get in a twit. There's a procedure to select another person to be on the ticket and a running mate. But because it's so late, it could be messy.
Well, you also have this other fly in the ointment here, where you have the possibility of the first black and first black female ascending to the presidency, and if they yank that out of her, they're going to make a lot of people mad.
Yeah, that will be a problem. And by the way, I don't know if you're going to get around to it, but I thought you'd probably ask me about J.D. Vance. And let me just say very quickly.
Sure.
I think he's going to be good, and I like to tell the story that I'm double related to the Vances in Carroll County, Mississippi. So when I first met with J.D. Vance, I said, we may be cousins, long distance. And then I went over and met with him after he got elected to talk about the Senate and what you need to do. We had a good conversation. And then I did say, J.D., what's with the beard? He said, what do you mean? I said, why do you have a beard? And he said, my wife likes it. I said, well, that's the best excuse I've heard. But, you know, he is smart. He is articulate. Some of his positions have been questionable. He's going to have to take a serious look at what his thinking is, what his support is for President Trump with regard to particularly foreign policy and defense issues, where he's been a little shaky. So, you know, I think he'll be fine, but, you know, like all of us, you have to grow and learn.
Well, shaky, you mean as far as support to Ukraine in this war? Yeah.
I personally think he's wrong on Ukraine. If Putin and Russia just takes over Ukraine, they won't stop there. And then the situation will be even more difficult. And, you know, what do we do if Putin decides to go into Poland or one of the Baltic states? I understand what he's saying. You know, we've put a lot of money into that defense of Ukraine. Are we sure where all of it's going? How much is enough? What is the strategy to win? Is there a strategy to get some kind of negotiated solution or settlement to stop the killing? That has not been explained and hasn't, in my opinion, really been accomplished yet. And I bet
it hasn't. Plus the fact, with the strength of Russia and the Russian army, isn't a foregone conclusion if we continue to pour money in this thing for another 6 months or another 6 years, will the outcome be the same thing?
Well, I don't know. But I was just fixing to say, I'll guarantee you this, when he's elected, President Trump will go to Ukraine and to Russia and say, hey, let's get this thing worked out. The art of the deal is needed.
Yes. If people haven't read those books, they need to read them. They will get a totally different look at the acumen of this president as far as administration and leadership. One other question here. If they choose a vice president for Kamala Harris in the presidency, who do you think it's going to be?
Oh, I don't really have any idea.
Well, it's a very short list.
Some speculation that she might pick the lady governor of Michigan, Whitmer.
Ooh, wow.
If that's the case, we'd have two women at the top there. But she might go with some other governor, like the governor of Illinois, Fitzer. But their farm team's not that strong.
No, it's not. It's not. So I have no idea what they do. But the other part of that is, and I think the number one story that is, it's like the 800-pound gorilla in the kitchen there, is what do we do with 20, 30 million, realistically 10 million, who probably have gotten voter registration, illegals who've gotten voter registration, some of them thinking that they have to fill this out, they have to go here, drop it in a box. What do we do? How do we stop that?
Well, first of all, we got to seal the border. Secondly, we have got to have a process to round up some of these illegal immigrants that have criminal records and send them back to where they came from. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that when the election comes around, quite frankly, I think you should have to show ID and who you are. I mean, goodness gracious, to get in a movie theater, you have to show your ID. Yeah. But we kind of let our election process get away from us in a lot of states, and I think yes. We will have to pay close attention to that this year. I think it's
maybe an understatement. Listen, it is always a pleasure. I promise you I'll call you back and we'll get you back on again because a wealth of information and wisdom, and we do thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. It's always a great pleasure, and it was a great honor to represent Mississippi those 35 years.
Thank you, sir. Trent Lott, former majority leader of the U.S. Senate, 35 years, 16 in the House, 19 in the Senate. Henry Barber, we found him. He is coming up next.